education is an industry that is so ripe for disruption,
Yes.
but there is also something quite addictive to standing on the stage at a graduation and talking to graduates and hearing how your product changed their life.
Yeah.
And having come from insurance and lighting and credit cards, you never got to hear that your product changed their life because it largely didn't.
Welcome to The Glass Ceiling, the podcast where business leaders share their stories, struggles and triumphs.
There is a lot in that. There's a lot of learning.
We sort of had different views on how the business should be ran.
The next 10 years looks like for South Australia.
Startup's the easiest. I'm your host, Marissa Hankinson from Wavebreaker, and I'm passionate about amplifying their voices. Join me as we explore the highs and lows of innovation, entrepreneurship and leadership. From founders to CEOs, our guests will share their insights, experiences and advice on how to succeed and make a lasting impact. Get ready for inspiring conversations and valuable lessons. Let's shatter the glass ceiling, one story at a time.
Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Look no further than Next Workspace. Located on level 15, 45 Pirie Street, our incredible facilities offer everything you need to thrive, from comfortable workspaces to cutting-edge technology and amenities. Plus, our collaborative community will help you connect with like-minded professionals, share ideas and learn from each other's experiences. With flexible workspaces, meeting rooms and event spaces, you'll have everything you need to grow your business. And with our supportive community, you'll never be far from inspiration, motivation or a helping hand. At Next Workspace, we're more than just an office, we're a community for innovation and creativity. Join us today and watch your business soar. Next Workspace, empowering your success. Visit us at www.nextworkspace.au.
Welcome to The Glass Ceiling. Can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. I am Jo Thomas. I'm currently the CEO and co-founder of Enroller.
Enroller. So are you going to expand a little bit on Enroller for me?
I am. Enroller is really the produce, the product of my earlier career. So I spent a lot of time at iSelect and then Compare the Market and executive roles there. And then I was running the Australian Institute of Business, which is a higher education company. So the largest provider of online MBAs in Australia. And I think I really realised when I was in both of those roles that comparison platforms work really well for complex, difficult products. And so Enroller is really that. It's a comparison platform that helps people find the right education so that they can achieve a life-changing sort of result in their career. And so we're very early stage. We're not even a year old yet, but it's exciting.
So startup?
Very much startup, early stage startup.
Okay. So Enroller, I'm assuming that's a play on the word enroll?
It is. It is.
Okay.
We had another name when we launched, but no one could spell it. So Enroller. Enroller is where we've landed.
Okay. And from my side with the vocation and the course, have people already decided what they're going to do, or does the platform also help them choose where they want to go?
Look, it's a great question, and the answer, annoyingly, is both.
Okay.
So for some people, they know what they want to do, or at least they know the job that they want to do. And so what we do is help them find the educational pathway to achieve that goal. So they might already know that they want to go into individual support, or they know they want to become a counsellor. So we then help them work out what course and with which provider is the right one for them to achieve that goal. And then stage 2 will be for those who are not yet sure. So how do we help provide both that career guidance and then the educational pathway to get there? So we may do that ourselves. We may end up partnering. There's some really awesome organisations that help people work out what they want to be when they grow up, or even if they're 45, what they want to be when they grow up more.
Yes.
And so whether we do it ourselves or we partner will remain to be seen. But there's definitely 2 cohorts there.
Okay. And what about from my side, because I came from vocational education as well, but through trade apprenticeships, is your platform going to be in addition to government resources, instead of government resources? How's that going to work?
So the government does an outstanding job of regulating the sector, making sure that the qualifications are the things that we need that exist within the vocational education space, but they don't always make things simple. And so what we really do is both aggregate quality providers. So not just say, here's the 215 people that are accredited, that may or may not be of variable quality. So we only list quality providers, but we also understand what it is that you're looking for. And so a lot of people who are navigating the vocational education sector have never engaged with post-secondary education before, and perhaps don't have a strong amount of confidence in their own ability to work out what questions they need to ask, or simply just don't have the experience.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we will ask you the questions so that we can recommend the right course for your circumstance. Okay. So part-time, full-time, online, in person, are you in the industry? Are you not in the industry? What level of support are you going to need? How is it that you need to study? And then we will make a recommendation from that panel for you. Okay. So if you go to the government site, you'll get everyone. You need to make the decision. We help you make that decision by giving you a recommendation.
And does Enroller also tie into funding streams at state level and those kind of things? So if people were looking, is it self-funded, funded? Is that another criteria of selection?
Absolutely. So every state has different funding arrangements. So for some states, the providers can use providers like us to help find students. In other states, we're unable to recommend funded courses, but we will send people even to providers that aren't on our panel because we want the right outcome for them. So we will help them navigate payment plans, funding arrangements, whether or not they're eligible, how they can afford it, everything to do with feeling confident that this is the course I should study because this is the outcome I want to achieve, and I now know that I can do it and it will get me where I want to go.
Okay, that's good to hear. So it sounds like you have had a career change, even though there's some synergy with what you were doing before. So tell me about where you started. You've mentioned some of your roles previously, but where did Jo originally start?
So we can go back many decades to the very beginning, why you shouldn't let 16-year-olds make life decisions. I basically left school, went to university, was the first in family to be able to go to university. So I was really lucky in that my parents sent us to a great school and then supported both my sister and I to go to university.
And what did you study?
And I studied radio. So I did a Bachelor of Communication Studies with a major in radio. Because,
you can tell.
Yes, thank you very much. And I remember them asking, and I was like, I just like the sound of my own voice. I never actually worked in radio. So like many people in the 90s, I was headed to Europe. September 11 happened, which gives away how old I am. I stopped in Melbourne for 3 months and then never left Australia. And so I ended up working in a call centre and really trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do. Ended up in management and then started to do an MBA and took a job at iSelect and never intended to stay there. They were in scale-up stage at the time. It just seemed like it was well paid and not that hard compared to what I'd been doing while I could finish off my MBA, and then I would go and get a real job outside of call centres.
Because this isn't real jobs.
Yeah, because call centres weren't a real job. Now, in hindsight, they were probably some of the best grounding in customer orientation, leadership, doing a lot with a little. Call centres are never sort of awash with money, and really meeting some fascinating people. So at the time, though, I thought I needed to go and do a real job. And so I joined iSelect to run their call centre, and just happened to join at a time where they were in massive scale-up mode. So they were the darling of media and probably one of Australia's first tech startups. Yeah. So I remember seeing, I think it was an Airtree graph recently, and it was one of the very first tech startups to reach $100 million in valuation.
So what year would this have been?
I'm always terrible with this. This would have been 2006 roughly, when I was there. And so I started as the call centre manager, and by the time we listed, I was operations director. So I had the product team, I had the commercial team, I had the sales team, bunch of other teams that were reporting through to me. So
it's terrible when you think you forget your teams, isn't it? It's like you feel so bad.
I know. I know.
I'm missing. You're always missing one. You can have.
It's like, who have I missed? But also, who am I claiming that someone else was actually running? Because it was a long time ago. And it was an amazing time. I was there for 6.5 years. I started with a team of 22. I finished with a team of 350 in a publicly listed organisation. And so, having never intended to stay, it was really the career maker for me, where I suddenly went from sort of not knowing what I wanted to do to really loving leadership, but loving growth. So innovation, growth and leadership just became sort of my drug that I was addicted to. I'm a bit boring. It's the only drug I'm addicted to.
No, that's fine. That's a good one to have.
I think I might have smoked at the time. And so we listed, it became a bit less fun from a growth and an innovation and a leadership perspective. And I realized that keeping the train on the tracks wasn't really my vibe. And so I moved to the competitor to compare the market. So there were 5 of us that moved there. And I spent a year as the chief operating officer there before deciding that the entrepreneurial bug had bitten me harder than I realized. And ended up setting up an LED lighting business with an old colleague of mine.
Okay, so it was very different.
Very different. Wonderful experience. I'd never negotiated a lease before. I was literally assembling the furniture, but very quickly realised that physical stock was something that I wasn't that into, and was offered the job at Australian Institute of Business. So never intended to move to Adelaide. Never intended.
So when did you move to Adelaide? What year was
end of 2018.
Okay, all right, yep.
And I remember coming here for the interview and calling my partner back in Melbourne and her saying, we're moving to Adelaide, aren't we? And I was like, I really want the job. And 2 months later we were here. We bought a house before I'd even started the job.
Oh my gosh.
And so I started there as chief operating officer and did that for 2.5 years, and then ended up taking the chief executive role.
Yeah,
it was, and that was a really fun 5.5 years. Education is an industry that is so ripe for disruption, but there is also something quite addictive to standing on the stage at a graduation and talking to graduates and hearing how your product changed their life.
Yeah.
And having come from insurance and lighting and credit cards, you never got to hear that your product changed their life, because it largely didn't.
No.
And then being able to lead that team of people who were really purpose-driven and to engage with those students. And in fact, I've been gone a year and a bunch of students called me from Canada a couple of weeks ago just to say hi. It's amazing to have that connection with your customers. And so, I love that job.
You must have a phenomenal network all over the world.
Yeah. So we operated in Australia and Canada. And so particularly in those 2 countries, I get very well looked after as and when I travel to Canada. Even my best friends have done the MBA. And again, I think that's something nice to be able to love your product enough that your best friend will pay $35,000 to consume it. So that was a really wonderful job, and I became very keen on leading an entire company, and then got back to train on the tracks time.
And you're like, I need to make a move. This isn't. When you get to a certain point, you've made it. You've made that difference, and you're like, there's something else.
Yeah. And my partner's like, are you insane? You've done all the hard work. Now is the time to enjoy and reap the rewards with your well-paid, secure job. And
are you reaping the rewards if you're not getting a personal satisfaction?
Yeah, and that was exactly it for me. Is that work has always been, and my career has always been, a really big part of who I am, not just what I do. And so that sense of pace and progress and transformation is so intrinsic to how I feel about myself that if I'm not doing that, I find myself, and I'm not a cynical person, but I found myself becoming less motivated, more cynical about things. And you can't stand in front of a company and roll your eyes as the CEO. That's, sure, about something ridiculous, but if you're not fully invested in what's next, and it's not that what's next was wrong, it just wasn't my cup of tea. And I look back, and ultimately it's why I left iSelect, which is a job that I loved, but I just lost the passion for keeping the train on the tracks.
Yeah. And it's a good way to, that's a good analogy to putting the trains on the track. I mean, I do believe that call centers especially are the university of life of apprenticeship sales, rejection. I think it does build up quite a lot of resilience.
I do too.
So how are you finding that resilience now with your startup?
Oh, startup life is nuts. And it's probably more nuts than I even contemplated or imagined. Because like I'm on the phone sometimes. So I'm back to 20 something years ago where I'm like, hi Marissa, it's Jo here from Enroller. I saw that you were interested in a Cert 3 individual support. And then, my other phone will be ringing and it's a venture capitalist who wants to talk to me about investing. And then I'm looking at Google and I'm like, oh, my ads are broken. And then I'm like, oh, it's payroll. And so I'm having to put payroll through. And so it is absolute chaos all the time.
But I've got a strange feeling that you're thriving in the chaos. I'm picking up the, it's like, I'm loving this.
Yeah, I do. And I think, I really loved leading a big team at AIB, but there's also something really gratifying about doing the work instead of herding the cats. And I love herding the cats and I love the leadership, but you don't have that direct link to I did this thing and it worked, or I did this thing and I spend a lot of time being like, I effed it, but it's okay, I fixed it. It's probably the most common thing that I say at the moment. There's something really gratifying about doing something and having it impact straight away.
Yes.
Or break straight away. So the feedback loop in startup life
is quite quick.
Is really quick. And there was definitely a moment where, and my co-founder and I were talking about this, where it went from feeling like a fun project into a business where we had to hit milestones and like not break things.
Right, we're not playing anymore.
Yeah,
playtime's over.
Yeah. Like we've got people who work for us and who we like owe payroll and who we owe to make this work, and investors who are looking. So it did definitely change from project to okay, this is a real job now. But it's fun. And I think you have to be resilient. And, particularly if you're fundraising, you get told no all the time. You're trying new things, so they break all the time. And you have to just take the lesson and move on.
So are you actually getting you talked about the gratification with the graduates. Are you, you just mentioned, you talk about a Cert 3 in individual support, for example. Yeah. Are you actually getting to speak to those people, or is it quite remote with the platform?
So we engage with the students or the prospective students directly. It's not just online. Now, of course, in startup land, the more we can make it tech enabled and have people self-serve, the better. But we're learning how to deliver a great service by engaging in a human way. So, is there a world where AI will enable us to create human-like experiences? Sure. We hope so. But for now, the best way to know why people make a decision or why people don't is to actually be on that phone call with them.
Okay. Great stuff. So you mentioned funding.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about what's going on in your funding journey. Let's say that.
So this may sound cocky, and I don't mean it that way, but when you've been working for 20-something years, there's not a lot of things that are completely new. There's variations on a theme. I've led teams before. Maybe there's a new problem, but fundamentally, humans are humans.
Not much changes.
You're doing it in education, or you're doing it in insurance. P&L is a P&L. So there's a lot of sort of business that I'd done before. But I'd never gone out and done fundraising before. And so it's the first time that I've been completely incompetent.
I'm sure you're not. I'm sure you might be being a hard yourself.
No. So it was fun. It was hard and it was time consuming.
So how many rounds have you done?
So we actually did an accelerator program with a VC called Antler late last year. And that was basically to validate the idea. And so they gave us $225 as pre-seed or as startup funding. We've just finished a pre-seed round, which I can't unfortunately discuss anything else about. Okay. But, we would have met with nearly 40 investors. Everyone's really nice. And in some ways that's the hard part, because everyone's really nice and they tell you nice things.
Then they don't
but then
invest.
then they don't put their hand in their pocket.
Or
And
their money
so-
where their mouth is.
Correct. And so, I think one of the biggest challenges was not being afraid of getting a no. So instead of falling in love with how nice people were, and it was fun. I met smart, interesting, young, ambitious people in an industry that I'd never sort of engaged with before. So I loved meeting everyone, but you had to actually push to get an answer. And then to
did they make it there on the spot, or is it a case of, they go away, they do that consideration, you're just one of many on that?
You're just one of many. And look, for them, investment is a pipeline, just like for us finding for them, they have a pipeline of founders and they'll invest in some and not in others. So I suppose they have a conversion rate. And for me, I have a bunch of investors that I'm talking to, and some will invest and some won't. And so again, it's just another sales funnel, really. But I had to gird my loins and actually ask people to make an investment rather than just talk to them about the business. And you get a bunch of no's, and that you have to try to not have that hurt. But
don't roll your eyes, poker face. It's okay.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. But once you get the first yes, it's much easier to get the rest. So,
well, it's like someone else believes in what you're trying to do. So it's, in some respects, it's a bit of a validation that you are on the right path. And that must then fuel your belief more.
It does. And I think it sends a signal to other investors as well. I think when you're this early stage, there's a nervousness to jump on. And in some ways, I think my corporate history was both a benefit, but also, AIB was a private equity backed business.
Yeah.
You don't make promises to private equity that you can't deliver. You just don't do that. But in venture capital land, you promise the stars, and they're happy if you get halfway up the mountain. And so, they'd like you to still hit the stars, but for them, they're not managing for downside. They're looking for unicorn potential. And so I think one of the challenges for me in the early days was actually talking about what could happen rather than what I'm 100% confident will happen.
Oh, that must have been quite interesting, from even just your pitch and your business plan. So when you're in startup, so you're going to do startup, scale up, are you looking at that 10-year plan of what this can look at? And is that what you're pitching?
Yes.
Not like stage 2?
Yeah, and there's a difference between a really good profitable business and a venture capital backable business. And I didn't understand that. So I thought,
you've got to explain that to me now, because I'm sure there's people here we need to know.
I'm terrified that a VC will listen. But, for me, I was like, if we build a business that's doing $50 million of revenue and, let's say $8 to $10 million of EBITDA, that would be a really good business. And venture capital are like, you're not interested. And I actually remember one quite prominent investor, I did the whole pitch, and she says to me at the end, she goes, look, this sounds wildly profitable, so I'm out. I was like, sorry, what?
What? You'd think they'd be like,
yeah. But really what venture capital are looking for is the unicorn business, the $1 billion business. They want, if your business goes well, could it return their whole fund?
Yes.
So if they give you 200 grand today and they have a $20 million fund, can they get 100 times their investment post-dilution on just you? And so then
they really are. When you say unicorn, you're looking at unicorn that sprouts stars, that probably farts rainbows.
Correct.
And that's probably what they're looking at.
They're looking for the $100 million of revenue business. And actually, it's about valuation more than is it a good business. And I don't mean that it's a bad business. It should also be a good business. But it's about growth potential. And so I really had to get my head around. And in fact, one investor gave me great advice. Well, it was sort of criticism, but it ended up being great advice, which was that we weren't ambitious enough. And I'm thinking, what? I've been ambitious. Like ambition is core to me. What do you mean I'm not ambitious enough? And I had to get my head around selling what could be rather than what was guaranteed. And because they're not monitoring downside, they're not managing downside, they're looking for upside. And once I could make that shift, I had to get comfortable that our business could be that, because you don't want to be looking someone in the eye and being like, oh yeah, we can 100% get to $100 million of revenue if you can't see a path to get there.
Yeah.
I had to figure out what the path to get there could be.
Yeah, but what, like the vocational sector is, I don't even know what is that as a market?
$16 billion.
$16 billion.
And so I could get my head around where we're going to get. So there's 12 billion of government funding, and then so the 16 is 12 billion of government funding, and then my estimate is about 4 billion of self-funded.
Yeah. So when you say that 100 million,
it's not that big.
It's like pimple on the elephant, really. I know, but yeah, I can sort of see where that.
And so that was a real lesson for me, that it's a different game to play to try and build a VC-backed business versus a good business. And that was a good lesson to learn. And we had to think about it because it puts different demands on the founders. It puts different demands on the business in terms of what that growth needs to look like. And ultimately, my co-founder and I decided that we were all in. And so we went all in.
And you've also got going around these rounds of venture capital, and we did talk slightly off camera about this, in that you are also, your co-founder's female too?
Yes.
So 2 female co-founders,
yes,
which is out of the venture capital that is invested. We do know that it's less than 2% that go. So really, you're doing this rounds, but you've also, yes, you might have a great product, you've got to be ambitious, etc. But you've also got, unfortunately, gender is a little bit on the downside. How have you tried to overcome that?
It's an interesting one, because statistically, I guess that probably it hindered us in some ways. And I've certainly played back even that ambition piece, which is, as women,
are we putting a cap on it because we're female?
And as a Gen X woman, is it that I don't have that, I can do anything that a Gen Z might have? Now, is that a generational thing? Is it just, because I've actually lived it and I know that I don't know. And so it's a question that I think about often, because female CTO and an actual software engineer, and then myself, we're both in our 40s, and that's an unusual mix. But I only know my own experience. And so, I didn't find it difficult to get a meeting with a VC.
No.
I found them courteous and generous in feedback and in introductions to people if it wasn't quite their cup of tea. And look, we're not a B2B.
Is that community quite generous in that respect? It's like, I get where you're going at. It's not me. However,
unbelievable.
That opening the doors is positive.
Unbelievable. So in corporate, you largely just sort of talk to your own team, or you're engaging with people because either you're trying to sell them something or they're trying to sell you something, or you're a good and active networker, and I've often been quite a poor networker. Okay. And then people talked about the startup ecosystem, and I have to admit, I was a bit like, it sounds like a bit of a wank. But it's not. I cannot believe the generosity that people have in introductions, in feedback, in just willing to meet with you, willing to connect you. It's a small, and it is an ecosystem. It's small, and I think everyone understands how symbiotic all of the relationships are. Much less like hold your cards close to your chest as it is in sort of corporate land.
Yeah, a bit more competitive, really, and maybe I get the VC is a bit more collaborative. Like let's see if we can make it work.
So I never felt like I was disadvantaged. Good. But who knows?
But on the other side of it, you did get pre-seed funding. 2% is 2% a reflection of females in business, not just VC. You've got all these other analytics to put on top of it as well. But you did get funding, someone's got to be the 2%.
Yeah, and of our investors, one was a female who led the round, and the other 3 were males of all different ages and generations. Yeah. So it's hard to know because I only have my own lived experience. But certainly there was nothing overt. Good. Now, could we have got a better valuation? Maybe. We're also not B2B SaaS, so could we have got a better valuation if we were B2B SaaS? Probably.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know, and so it's something that I chew over a lot, because I look at the stats and then I look at my experience and I don't feel like they line up.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Break the mold, Joe. It's just like, because sometimes it can be really negative out there. And if your lived experience is not that, then, this podcast is going to give hope to people who may be listening or watching.
Yeah. So just get out there and give it a crack. So, I don't know. For me, it was positive.
And from those that you have met and been connected with, you said you're not the greatest networker, but are you finding that there are unlikely mentors or people that have come in as part of this startup phase that or having an influence or having an impact? You mentioned some feedback that you had, but is there some constants that you're sort of going, yeah, they're in my circle?
I think it's still, there's definitely a few that I want in my circle, but and they're like peripheral. I need to like drag them in and make them be my friend a little bit.
That's okay.
There's probably 3 or 4 investors who didn't invest, who I've had ongoing sort of more casual engagement with now. We were just hiring a new marketing lead, and I put a post on LinkedIn for people that we actually didn't hire and just said, look, I know it takes ages to recruit. If you want some vetted candidates, reach out. And one of the investors who didn't invest in us has actually referred me to 2 of their portfolio companies.
Oh, fantastic.
To help find these candidates roles and to help them find good candidates for their roles. And so I think if you participate in the ecosystem, then people recognise that. And I'm really conscious of trying to be more generous than I have been in the past.
Well, I'm going to say, which I found fascinating before, we're not just talking about, obviously we're in Adelaide in the studio. We're not talking about startup ecosystem being just Adelaide, because obviously you're national and you've got a national team. So you're a complete remote team. How many have you got now?
So we've just hired our 5th employee, which is 5th including the 2 founders. So our 3rd employee who's not a founder. And we are now in almost every capital city. So I'm here in Adelaide. We've got a UX UI designer in Brisbane, our new marketers in Sydney, my co-founders in Perth, and our course advisor is in Melbourne. So we've been really intentional about being remote first. Mm-hmm. And it happened by necessity in that I met my co-founder. She's in Perth. She had zero desire to move to Adelaide. I had zero desire to move to Perth. But we really wanted to do this together.
So your working day must be shifted a little bit?
We try to be as asynchronous as possible. So we've only got an hour and a half difference with Perth at the moment, but then it's 2.5 during winter. But I tend to be a morning person, which doesn't work well when you go founders in Perth. But I do my focused work first thing in the morning. We catch up every day. But we try to use Slack, we try to use document sharing, we request for comment. So we're really intentional about
keeping that comms going.
Yeah, and having remote, and I think she's taught me this. So my co-founder worked remotely for years before COVID, whereas I only did remote during COVID and I hated it because I just spend 9 hours a day in Zoom meetings. And I was like, this is so bad. It's like all the tiring bits of being in a meeting, but none of the super extrovert, there's people around me, exciting bits of being
the energizing bits not working.
Just the crap bits. And so we actually have a playbook on like, what does remote work look like? So we've written a ways of working. And I think she's taught me that it's a competence rather than a personality type. Yeah. So, my personality type is not really remote. It's like be in an office and have people around me because I get a lot of energy from that. But actually, I've developed the competence to work remotely and it works really well. Like we have banter and we catch up face to face and we have, all hands meetings. We had one today. But
okay, what's all hands meeting?
So it just means everyone.
Oh, okay. That's all right. I had visions of like putting your hands up or something.
All hands. No, it's So one of our values is transparency. So we share, and actually I did this at AIB, we share our revenue, we share our gross profit, we share our targets, we share our net profit, how much cash we have. So everything that's critical to the business, we share with everyone who works with us. Because I think it's silly to hoard that information because people will fill in the gaps. And people always fill in the gaps with worse than the reality.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I do want to just go back to the factors. Is that because of your role and your experience with iSelect that you have that transparency? Do you think that comes from the fact that you did do that growth stage and you did, get listed, etc.?
Yeah, I do. And I think the previous CEO of AIB, he was really open with sharing that information and it had never occurred to me that people didn't. And because he was so and this is the reason why, I think it went from it's just something you do into actually it's a really important thing to intentionally do.
Yeah.
And I think it makes a massive difference. I think people better understand how they contribute, but also why certain decisions are being made.
Yes.
If you were down X% last month in revenue, then if you're asking people to manage costs this month, there's context. They're not seeing the plants. I remember in one job, the people came and took the plants away.
You can't remove the plants. That's like...
And then everyone knows you're in trouble when the hired plants are being removed from the office. So it's far better to tell people what's going on before the plant guy turns up.
But I think people can escalate.
Absolutely.
And, it can cause unrest and speculation. And everyone always has that, what's in it for me? How's it going to impact me? And so I do agree that transparency is a good way
People
forward.
are not idiots. So, when the plants go, people know something's up. But also people often catastrophize. So you're far better off explaining what happened so they understand the context instead of having to fill in the gaps with a reality that's infinitely worse.
Well, Jo, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking to you and your energy, and I wish you all the best. I will be watching Enroller and your progress, and it was absolutely fantastic to have you on the show. Before we go, how can people find out about Enroller?
You can go to Enroller, which is enrola.com.au, or I am on LinkedIn. Jo-Thomas. I think I was one of the first people to get their name on LinkedIn.
Oh, my name too.
So it's not like Jo Thomas 19774. It's just Jo Thomas.
So recap, it's Jo-Thomas.
Correct.
On LinkedIn. Congratulations.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marissa.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Glass Ceiling. If you've liked what you heard, please subscribe, as we'd love to have you as part of our community. We're grateful to our guests for sharing their inspiring stories and insights with us, and to our sponsors in making this podcast possible. This podcast was brought to you by Wavebreaker. Join us next time as we shatter the glass ceiling, one story at a time.